Hello, welcome back to your STEP classes. These are 6 half-hour info sessions for young people and others that cover development, behavior, adolescence, risks, distress, and the ACE study. It's science that explains people. This is session 6, the ACE study and trauma, and the ACE study stands for the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It is presented by the Kansas Traffic Safety Resource Office. By the way, a few beginning slides are repeated every session. It's just a few. They'll be over soon, and this is one of them. Welcome. These sessions were designed for teens, but everyone else is welcome. We think everyone should know how different the risks are for teens. I'm your narrator, Karen Williams. This is my message to teens. Please forgive me. I'm going to speak about you and your brains and the rest of your bodies as if you were not in the room. It's often easier that way when others are also in the room. For instance, on some slides, I will use they and their instead of you and your, or often, I will just refer to teens. As we learned in session 4, across the developed world, teens are at a far greater risk of 3 things: traffic deaths, mental health problems, and addiction than all other populations. To accurately measure your risk, you need information. Session 4 dealt with traffic risks. Session 5 dealt with mental health. And this session is going to deal with the ACE study and addiction, but we're going to talk about addiction before we talk about the ACE study. The goal of this session is to help you understand the long-term risks of untamed and unmanaged survival instincts and reflexes, those that can overwhelm you, throw you off the beam, and traumatize you, on both the brain and the rest of the body. Now, remember that the teen brain and the rest of the teen body are being remodeled, and they work differently. They're under construction. In fact, the stakes during the teen years are among the highest in all of development. The latest science shows that there are 75 major differences in the teen brain when compared with the adult brain, and these differences affect teens' lives in different ways. You, teens, cannot compare yourselves to adults because your brains and the rest of your bodies operate so differently, and those differences cause your risks to be different too. You are more sensitive to and are more affected by distress. And since one of the most distressful episodes you will encounter during your teen years is learning to drive, that explains why the Kansas Traffic Safety Resource Office is bringing you this series. Now we're going to talk about adversity, trauma, and addiction, but we're going to talk about adversity first. Our survival instincts and reflexes react automatically to any adverse experience and can cause us distress. Now, among those adverse experiences that happen during childhood are poverty, hunger and food insecurity, homelessness and sofa surfing, foster care, family separations, blended families, custody sharing, medical procedures, shock and grief, bullying, family and community violence, child neglect, child abuse, sexual abuse, substance abusing parent or a substance abusing sibling, parent with a mental illness or a debilitating physical illness, parent or sibling in the justice system, medical epidemic or pandemic, military deployments, deportations, and escaping war. And often such experiences can overwhelm us, in other words, traumatize us, throw us off the beam. Now, just as exposure to the sun's rays is one of the greatest risk factors for skin cancer, exposure to adverse experiences is one of the greatest risk factors for psychiatric illnesses and disorders. In other words, mental and emotional illnesses and disorders like anxiety, major depressive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, because they can literally throw you off the beam, overwhelm you, and traumatize you. However, not all individuals exposed to adverse experiences develop mental, emotional, or behavioral illnesses and disorders, because they have the skills that have become habits that give them greater resilience. Sometimes we just have to step off the beam for a little bit, or if we get thrown off, we can get back on the beam and stay there because we are resilient. Now, the most important thing to remember about adverse experiences is that even when the source of your distress could not be prevented, in other words, you couldn't prevent the adverse experience in the first place, You can still manage your emotions. You can manage your attitudes, your thoughts, your actions that are caused by your survival instincts and reflexes and your sensitivities to distress, your temperament. And you can manage your temporary disordered responses and keep them from intensifying. You can prevent their escalation and thereby prevent reaching the criteria for a disorder. Just the presence of calming distress management skills and habits that produce calming biochemicals prevents the escalation of the symptoms and it prevents the disorder because it's increased your resilience, your ability to get back on the beam and to bounce back and to stay on the beam, to become resilient. Which brings us to our biochemistry. Now, we already know some about our biochemistry because we know about our cortisol, but there's more to know. Now, remember that our biochemistry refers to the sets of chemicals we make inside our own bodies. There's a set that operates our survival instincts and reflexes, acts like an alarm, and a set that calms us, acts like a rescue system. So humans have two basic sets of biochemicals that operate their behavior: an alarm system and a rescue system. Now, the alarm system is all about survival, and the rescue system is all about calming. Now, survival biochemicals speed us up, and calming biochemicals are those that calm us down, that rescue us. The first one that you think of with the survival speed us up group is norepinephrine. It is a neurotransmitter, and she keeps us up to speed. Not faster than we should go, just up to speed. She's there 24/7, works really hard. We love Nora. Then there's adrenaline. Adrenaline's in charge of our fight, flight, and freeze. And this includes epinephrine, which is another form of adrenaline. And they're about emergencies. Now, they don't spend long in our body. They do their job, just announce the emergency, that's our alarm, and they're out of there. But then there's cortisol. Cortisol is a steroid that accompanies adrenaline. Whenever there's adrenaline, there's cortisol. And he's for healing us, okay? And when he is, he can be a friend. But when he stays too long, he is definitely an enemy. Now, all of your survival biochemicals, those speed us up, are released automatically. They're for operating and healing our body and or when we feel threatened or upset. So let's go over to the ones that calm us down. These are our fabulous five, and they really are our rescue chemicals, our biochemicals. And they're released when our needs are met or when our needs are not met, when we use our protective distress management habits. And look, we have to balance these two. That's our job. Now let's talk about our fabulous five. All five of these partner in managing our reward center. That's our nurture center, okay, our needs. And the number one, serotonin. Now, I never call her by her full name, serotonin. I call her Sarah. So say Sarah with me. You say Sarah, you will never forget her. Now, she's one of our calming biochemicals, and she has a nickname, Rest and Digest, because she lets us rest and go to sleep, and she runs our digestive system. She runs our gut. And she has another moniker. She's called Restful Alertness because she's in charge of learning. She's in charge of our prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. She's actually queen of the body and the brain and everywhere. She's everywhere. Now, she's really in charge of the whole bottom rung of our reward center, all our physical needs, all our comfort. And 85 to 95% of her is made in our gut. Yeah, in our gut. She's in charge of the gut, so she's probably making herself. But your gut's known as a second brain, and that's because it has so many neurons there, and there are more messages from our gut to our brain in our head than from our brain in our head to our gut. We'll find out more about the gut later. Now, that brings us to oxytocin. He's about the second and third rungs. Calm, trust, safety, and bonding is his big game, okay? And 45 to 55% of oxytocin is made in our gut. Well, you're getting the picture about how important our gut is. Okay, that brings us to Dr. Dopa. Dr. Dopamine. He's in charge of the whole top of our reward center, our self-worth, esteem, our pleasure, motivation, and the pluses. And that's the reason he's so famous, is because of all the pluses. But let's find out where he's made. 45 to 55% of Dr. Dopamine is made in our gut. Okay, let's talk about the pluses. That brings us to anandamide, the body's THC. Well, that's the active ingredient in marijuana, if you might recognize it. Our body makes its own. And it's about calm, peace, and its nickname is bliss. It's a bliss chemical. And its whole job is to help Dr. Dopamine give us pleasure and motivation. And not only does it work with Dr. Dopamine, but it works with serotonin to do an entire bottom rung of our reward center. Especially to calm the gut and make elimination really happy. Okay, so now when we have access to anandamide when we have dopamine present. So we can get our own body's THC. Now that brings us to Endora. Well, our endorphins. That's our body's morphine. And yes, our body makes its own morphine. It's pain relief and euphoria. Its whole job, help Dr. Dopamine give us pleasure, take pain away enough that we don't have to use medication or we don't use as much medication. It's wonderful. Now, we have access to endorphins, when we have dopamine present and when we are moving, running, dancing, exercising, and laughing. Laughing builds more pain relief, more endorphins than almost anything else. That's why it's the best medicine. Now, what happens when we can't get our needs met? Do we have a fail-safe? Well, yeah. Belly breathing, belly breathing, belly breathing, belly breathing, belly breathing. Those are the skills and habits we want you to build. Because when you have a fail-safe like belly breathing and you practice it, you can make as much of these calming biochemicals as you need. But if you don't have your needs met, you're not going to get these any other way. So you want to be sure you know how to belly breathe. And you do it often. You practice it. Now, let's talk about the morphine molecule. It mimics our body's natural endorphin. Look, there's the endorphin receptor, and there's the endorphin molecule and the morphine molecule. And look how much more powerful our natural endorphin is. Now, endorphins are both psychological and physical painkillers, and we can build them on demand when we're active and moving and exercising, laughing heartily. And if we can't do that, we are deep, slow belly breathing and breathing out slowly. Belly breathing. It's our fail-safe. And marijuana's THC molecule mimics our natural anandamide. There's THC molecule, the anandamide molecule, and the nerve cell receptor. Anandamide produces a feeling of calm, well-being, and bliss, and it works with serotonin to help our bodies regulate functions ranging from appetite, sleep, mood regulation, neuroprotection, immune function, pain management, and even fertility. And we can build anandamide on demand by belly breathing deep, slow breathing out, smiling, laughing, music, gratitude, generosity, anything that makes somebody else feel good. You get a major dose of anandamide. Or you can belly breathe and you can get a massive dose of anandamide. But you got to do that really often and practice it. Now look, long-term cortisol increases our risks. It takes blood, oxygen, and energy and sends it to rapid, shallow holding your breath, or, rapid, shallow breathing or holding your breath. And that just makes more cortisol. It's very self-serving of him. And, he increases our blood sugar, and increases our blood pressure. It increases our heart rate. It tenses our muscles and heightens the stimulation of long-term survival memory and fight, flight, and freeze. And it decreases our sensitivity to pain, which sounds great, but why don't we just use our own endorphins to get rid of pain? You know where it takes its blood, oxygen, and energy from? Well, from our gut. It disrupts digestion and elimination and the manufacture of serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine. It takes blood, oxygen, and energy away from our immune system. 50% of our immune system is in our gut. And the 35% of our immune system is in our lymphatic system. And you know what the pump for it is? Yep, your diaphragm. Your heart pumps your blood. Your diaphragm pumps your lymphatic system. And it takes blood, oxygen, and energy from our PFC and hippo and disrupts learning and development. It's a very selfish chemical. So the alarm goes off. to tell us there's a danger in having cortisol in our system for a very long period of time. Well, then dopamine deficiency. If you want to know what it's like, there is a general lack of drive, motivation, and enthusiasm. In fact, the principal symptom of dopamine deficiency is depression, the feeling of boredom, chronic boredom, apathy, loss of satisfaction, chronic fatigue, and low physical energy with no desire to move the body. And how do you get endorphins? Oh, you have to at least laugh or move your body. So, this is what increased brain activity patterns in depression look like. When you're not depressed, your prefrontal cortex is getting all the blood and oxygen and energy it wants. When you are depressed, guess who's getting all your blood, oxygen, and energy? Amy G. Too much cortisol and too little dopamine for too long results in an increased risk of anxiety, followed by depression, a lack of anger control, sleep abnormalities, craving of starches and sweets, mood swings, and in the extreme, suicidal thoughts. And, there's endorphin and anandamide deficiencies because you must have dopamine present before you can have access to endorphins and anandamide. When you have a dopamine deficiency, you have endorphin and anandamide deficiencies. So it's physical and psychological pain becomes more intense and less manageable. We cannot find calm or comfort. We are distressed and more cortisol is released. And if you're a teenager, it's 2 to 5 times more than that of an adult. And if you aren't belly breathing, you're in trouble. So that brings us to addiction. Okay, substance use addiction means that an outside chemical, drug, or medication has taken over control or management of a person's survival reflexes. And now he or she cannot take back that control without help. Now, addiction is totally treatable, but I have a question for you. Why are teens so much more at risk for addiction? Well, science shows that there are more dopamine receptors in children's and adolescents' brains than in adults' brains, and these receptors are more sensitive. Now, remember that dopamine is one of our biochemicals that helps manage our reward center, and it reduces psychological and physical distress. DNA adds more dopamine receptors to offset the added cortisol teens have when they are upset and distressed, which makes sense. But when addictive substance chemicals and drugs are involved, they hijack our dopamine receptors. They fake meeting our needs, and they give us fake rewards. And the worst thing is, they use the added receptors and increase the effects of the addictive chemicals, which means teens are 5 times more at risk for addiction than adults. And psychoactive or psychotropic medications affect teens differently. That's because they were made for adults, tested with adults, and you need to use extreme care when prescribing them for a teenager. Columbia University found out about 5 times more at risk, and it's any substance or drug. It says the earlier teens use any substance, the greater the risk for addiction. If you wait till after 21, it's only 4.3% that become addicted, but if you first use before age 15, it's 28.1%. At 15 to 17, it's 18.6%. And this is alcohol only. The younger they start, the greater the risk. Age at first drink, later risk of alcoholism. If you wait till 21 or older, it's less than 10%. 13 and younger, over 45%. And this is alcohol, youth, addiction, and genes, your family history. The risk for developing alcoholism increases the younger a person starts using. On the left is the age of first alcohol use. Under 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and over 21. On the right is the percent that developed alcoholism. And there's a trend in that right column. 26, 21, 13, 9, and 7. And look, there's one age group that bucks the trend. Remember what that age group was? Coincides with the peak of pruning in the teen brain. Now let's talk about your genes, your family history. Does everybody know their family history? Well, it would be important because this is the percent that developed alcoholism. You add the age and the family history. Now, the distress factors in teens increase risks for addiction. There are many. Most teens are distressed from exhaustion. pruning the PFC, opening new neural territory, having a racing brain going 50 to 80 times faster than the adult brain, puberty, lack of sleep. And when teens are distressed, they have 2 to 5 times more cortisol and it stays 2 to 5 times longer. It's not good. And when teens are upset or distressed, they have a distorted feedback system. That's because cortisol interferes with the PFC. Plus, the extra dopamine receptors make the teen brain super sensitive. Teens are super sensitive to others' body language. Teens see a concerned face as an angry face. You have to say, this is my concerned face. I have an angry one, but this is my concerned one. And teens are super sensitive to others' voice intonations. Any teens in the room? Have you ever said or heard anybody else say to an adult, stop yelling at me? And the adult looks at you like you have 3 heads because they haven't raised their voice? Everything is magnified for you, the teen. It's like life had its volume turned up. And during the teens, when teens hurt, in other words, when they're uncomfortable physically or psychologically, they hurt worse than an adult in the same situation. And at the same time, the physical and psychological cravings for relief and comfort are magnified. And that is due to the increased number of dopamine receptors that are screaming to do something. Now, the need and drive for immediate relief. Teens are always seeking to meet their immediate needs. Now! Make it go away, make it stop by anything that works. I don't care about tomorrow. YOLO, you only live once, fatalistic, exhausted, no real jollies, but fakes are available. And almost none of our teens have distress management skills and habits. Look, untamed and unmanaged distress messes with development. So immediate relief is essential. They're craving what they need, but what they need is skills and habits. And remember the prefrontal cortex? Well, you remember our brain develops from the back to the front, and our PFC is the last to develop, and there is vital PFC development during the teen years. Well, when addictive substances, chemicals, and drugs hijack the dopamine receptors and the reward center, they also affect the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, altering its operation and interfering with its development. And after the PFC, the rest of the brain is affected, with the brainstem, in charge of life and death, being last. And that's when you overdose. Which brings us to our adverse childhood experiences, the ACE study. Now, the ACE study tells us what can happen when we're overwhelmed and traumatized, knocked off the beam, and have no distress management skills and habits. The ACE study is an ongoing project of the Epidemiology Office of the CDC. That's the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The P is silent, so it's just CDC. Epidemiologists are public health professionals who investigate patterns and causes of disease and injury in humans. They seek to reduce the risk and occurrence of negative health outcomes through research, community education, and health policy. They have really big questions. CDC epidemiologists ask, can being traumatized during childhood, knocked off the beam, cause you to have increased risk for psychological and behavioral disorders, as well as physical illnesses and diseases, and to die earlier than your peers who were not traumatized in childhood? Wow, big question. The ACE study answer was yes. Then neuroscientists asked, can we prove what CDC's epidemiologists found? And the neuroscientist answers, yes. So let's find out about this. When the ACE study was first published in 1998, there were major gaps in the science to explain the why and how of the study's findings. And you can see the arrows above that mark the scientific gaps. Well, then science, neuroscience, in fact, showed how untamed and unmanaged survival instincts and reflexes, knock you off the beam, interrupt the networking of the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, and the hippocampus, and thereby disrupt normal neurodevelopment. So they added a rung and called it disrupted neurodevelopment. So let's look at the whole pyramid. And remember, when we use a pyramid, we always look at the bottom first. So we start with adverse childhood experiences. Following that is disrupted neurodevelopment. And then following that is social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Then adoption of health risk behaviors, disease, disability, and social problems leading to early death. It's pretty serious. Well, let's see how they did the study. The CDC chose only 10 adverse experiences for its ACE study. And they chose the ones that they were sure for most people were going to knock them off the beam, traumatize them, overwhelm them. 5 were personal: physical neglect, emotional neglect, physical abuse, verbal abuse, and sexual abuse. And 5 were related to other family members: a parent who was a substance abuser, a mother who was a victim of domestic violence, a family member in jail or prison, a family member diagnosed with a mental illness, and the disappearance of a parent through divorce, death, or abandonment. They created a questionnaire with 10 items on it, one for each of those adverse experiences. And then 17,421 adults from all races and ethnicities volunteered to participate. They were all well-educated, well-employed, and had company-paid insurance. They got a complete physical, filled out a comprehensive health questionnaire, and answered the 10 ACE study questions. Now, the 10 ACE study questions were answered with simple yes or no answers, and then only the yeses were counted for a personal ACE score. For example, a person who had been physically abused, 1. Had an alcoholic parent, got 1. Had a mother who was beaten up, got 1. You added those 3 together, and you had an ACE score of 3. See how it works? Okay, here are the ACE study major findings. Childhood abuse, neglect, and exposure to other traumatic stressors are common, even in a well-educated, well-employed population enrolled in one of the nation's leading HMOs. 2/3, 66%, had at least 1, and they clustered. 1/5, 20% had 3, 10% had 5. Shocked people. Then when they matched the participants' ACE scores with their medical screenings, this is what they found. The higher the person's ACE score, the higher their health risks and problems. So here's neuroscience's explanations. And remember, we're starting at the bottom. We start with adverse childhood experiences. An adverse childhood experience occurs. Then adrenaline is released. Then untamed, unmanaged survival instincts and reflexes overwhelm and traumatize, and that's our warning. And that's when we should be using our skills and habits to do something to intervene, to stop the progression up the pyramid. But if we don't have those, here's what happens. AMG and cortisol shift blood, oxygen, and energy away from the PFC and the hippocampus and disrupt networking of neurons and development, turning them upside down. And if we don't stop cortisol at that point, it's going to continue. Okay, so cortisol continues, and there's social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Well, if you have no protective skills and habits or support, you're going to have mental, emotional, and behavioral problems or disorders and thinking problems. And what if, cortisol continues? Then you're going to be looking for a quick fix. Try addictive substances or self-harm or food because you don't know about the protective skills and habits that you could have used. Then if cortisol continues, you're going to have, think what cortisol does. It races your heart. If it's racing for a long time, it's going to get irregular beats. It's going to have some heart disease. You have high cholesterol, high blood sugar. Well, look, you can get heart disease and diabetes, and that could lead to early death. You die early. None of that's necessary. Because not everyone who has adverse experiences in their childhood continues up the pyramid to higher health risks and problems. The ACE study findings serve as a warning about what can happen to us when our survival instincts and reflexes are ignored or punished. And no one teaches us protective skills and habits that strengthen our resilience and keep us on the beam. You may have to step off the beam for a moment. Things happen. But you need the resilience to be able to get back up on the beam. And that's what the skills and habits do. Now, our sensations and emotions are both called feelings, but we are 85% physical senses and sensations and only 15% mental emotional, okay? There's emotions that are just 15% of us, and that's based on 85% physical senses and sensations. These are always first, and then we name the emotion. So if we want to change our emotions, we better be starting with our body. Always start with your body. Belly breathe, laughter, Smiling, even fake smiling works. Singing or humming or whistling. You know, all of these are our rescuers. But you know what? Music, arts, movement, any kind of movement, dance, sports, it doesn't matter. Step aerobics, it doesn't matter. It always affects our body first and then our mood. So start with the body and start with what you carry with you. You carry breathing with you at all times, your voice, everything else. And check out what cortisol is doing to you. Check your breathing. Check your heart rate. 60 to 80 beats per minute is normal. We can use belly breathing to lower our heart rate and calm the rest of our body. And once our breathing is slow and regular, our blood, oxygen, and energy is restored to our PFC and hippo, our prefrontal cortex and our hippocampus. We can think, we can learn, we can develop. And when we're calm, we can think about our other needs. Do we need water? Are we hungry? Are we tired? Do we feel safe? The longer we are calm, the more blood, oxygen, and energy is sent to our gut, making more dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, our rescuers. And when we have dopamine, we have anandamide and endorphins. And the stronger our immune system gets. The most important aspect of protective habits is that they have been practiced until they can be done without thinking. And that's why protective habits can be more powerful than our automatic survival reflexes. How we are affected by adversity is determined by our age, because we're more sensitive at different ages, and our automatic alarms and our protective offsets, our rescuers. We have risk factors and protective factors. Our risk factors are our fight, flight, and freeze. They're our automatic survival instincts and reflexes, but they can get away from us because it's times our temperament. That's our sensitivity to discomfort and our tolerance for distress and pain. And that equals the amount of alarm that we feel, and everybody feels alarm differently. It doesn't matter about the circumstance or situation or the experience. That can be the same for everybody. But you know what? How we feel about it, our automatic alarm system may be different than everybody else's. And our protective factors are our protective distress management skills and habits. Those are our learned reflexes that make us more resilient, fill us with resilience, our ability to bounce back and recover. And we need some support, an amount of support. The person who is going to help us through this, remind us and practice these habits with us and care about us. That's going to keep us on the beam. Or when we get off the beam, knocked off or not, just step off for a while, we can get back on and stay on. Be healthy, learn, and develop. Well, to protect ourselves from our survival instincts, we must try to stay in balance. We must try to stay in homeostasis. And we need to be all set most of the time because our PFC and our hippocampus have to be working most of the time, because that's what we're about during adolescence. Teenage years are about development. And we're going to be upset sometime. Everybody is. But what we need to do is use that as an alarm and be ready to reset, to calm ourselves down, to think clearly and have control of our behavior. We need our rescue system. Now, in childhood, keeping you in balance was the job of your adults. In childhood, keeping you in balance was the job of your adults. But now, part of that job is yours. And often, we need someone else's support and help to stay balanced. And remember, someone else may need your support and help too. Well, thank you for joining us for Session 6, the ACE Study in Trauma. It was presented by the Kansas Traffic Safety Resource Office. They not only want you safe in a vehicle, they want you safe outside that vehicle. They want you to have a really good life. Well, thank you for hanging in for all 6 sessions. Remember, there's so much more to know about we humans and so much more to know about you. So use this as a starting point. I'm Karen Williams, and I'm signing off. Take care of yourselves.